Chapter 1. Arrival at the Icebound Purgatory. The biting wind clawed at my face, a frozen rasp that mirrored the anxiety scraping at the back of my throat. McMurdo Station was a hive of temporary humanity, a stark contrast to the desolate, white expanse stretching in every direction. I pulled my parka tighter, the synthetic fur doing little to ease the chill that had already seeped into my bones. Transferring from a temperate Californian climate to this icebound purgatory had been a shock, a deliberate act of self-inflicted penance, perhaps. They called it a research opportunity, a chance to be at the forefront of cutting-edge science. I called it running from the ghosts that haunted my waking hours, the echoes of a life irrevocably shattered. Maybe, just maybe, the crushing weight of the Antarctic silence would finally drown them out. The transport plane, a hulking C-130, shuddered violently as it landed on the ice runway, spitting out a plume of frozen exhaust. I clutched my battered duffel bag, the worn canvas of familiar comfort in this alien landscape. Stepping off the plane felt like entering another world, a world devoid of color, warmth, and, I suspected, hope. A small, weathered sign proclaimed, "Welcome to Chronos Station, Sector 7. The name felt ominous, laden with a weight that belied the sterile, almost clinical, environment of the research facility itself. Sector 7 was a far cry from McMurdo's relative bustle. Here, isolation wasn't just a geographical reality, it was a palpable presence, a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed down on you with every breath. The facility was a cluster of interconnected modules, metallic protrusions clinging to the unforgiving ice. They looked less like laboratories and more like hastily erected bunkers, designed to withstand something far more sinister than the Antarctic climate. The wind howled around the structures, a mournful dirge that seemed to seep into the very metal itself. Inside, the air was surprisingly warm, almost stifling. The hum of machinery filled the corridors, a constant, low-frequency thrum that vibrated in my teeth. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, unnatural glow on the pale faces of the few researchers I encountered. They moved with a strange, almost mechanical efficiency, their eyes distant and unfocused. A woman with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that seemed to have seen too much approached me. She wore a lab coat that was impeccably clean, a stark contrast to the weariness etched on her face. "Dr. Eleanor Vance?" she asked, her voice clipped and professional. "Yes," I replied, adjusting the strap of my duffel bag. "I'm Dr. Anya Sharma, the lead researcher here at Chronos Station. Welcome to Sector 7. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll show you to your quarters." The corridors were narrow and claustrophobic, the walls lined with blinking monitors and complicated equipment. The air smelled of ozone and antiseptic, a sterile, almost unsettling combination. As we walked, Anya gave me a brief overview of the research being conducted at Chronos Station. "We're studying temporal anomalies," she explained, her voice tight. "Localized distortions in the space-time continuum." "Temporal anomalies," I echoed, skepticism lacing my tone. My doctorate was in geology, specializing in ice core analysis. I had expected to be drilling, not chasing theoretical physics. "Yes," Anya said, her gaze fixed ahead. "We've detected a fluctuation, an area where time doesn't seem to flow linearly. It's contained, localized." She paused. "For now." We stopped outside a small metal door labeled Vance. Anya swiped a card across a reader, and the door hissed open. The room was Spartan, furnished with a narrow bed, a desk, and a small closet. A single window offered a view of the endless white expanse outside. "This is it," Anya said, her voice flat. "Get settled in. I'll meet you in the main lab in an hour. We have a lot to discuss." She turned and walked away, disappearing down the corridor. I stepped inside and dropped my duffel bag onto the bed. The room felt cold, impersonal, utterly devoid of warmth or comfort. I walked over to the window and stared out at the desolate landscape. The wind howled, a lonely, mournful sound. Hello, Eleanor. The voice was soft, familiar, a whisper from a lifetime ago. I whirled around, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was empty. "Who's there?" I croaked, my voice barely audible above the wind. Silence, only the hum of the machinery and the relentless wind. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. It must have been my imagination, a trick of the mind, a phantom echo of the past. "Don't be afraid, Eleanor," the voice whispered again, closer this time, as if it were right beside me. "I've missed you." I stumbled back, pressing myself against the cold metal wall. The voice, it was him. It was David. But David was dead. David had been dead for 5 years. Panic clawed at my throat, a suffocating wave of terror. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the voice, the memory, the pain. "It's okay, Eleanor," the voice whispered, gentle, soothing. "I'm here now, I'm here to protect you." I opened my eyes, my vision blurring with tears. The room was still empty, but the voice, it was so real. "This isn't real," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This isn't happening." "Oh, but it is, Eleanor," the voice replied, a hint of something dark and sinister creeping into its tone. "It's all very, very real." The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The hum of the machinery seemed to intensify, vibrating in my skull. The wind howled outside, a deafening roar that seemed to mock my fear. I was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone, and something impossible and horrifying was with me. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that running hadn't saved me. It had led me straight to hell. Chapter 2: The Expanding Anomaly. Sleep evaded me that night. The voice, David's voice, echoed in my mind, weaving through the hum of the machinery and the howling wind. I tossed and turned in the narrow bed, the thin mattress offering little comfort. Every creak of the metal walls, every flicker of the fluorescent light sent a jolt of fear through me. The rational part of my brain screamed that it was grief, that the isolation and stress were playing tricks on my mind. But another part, a darker, more primal part, knew that what I had heard wasn't a hallucination. It was something else, something malevolent. I finally succumbed to a fitful, dream-haunted sleep. Images flashed behind my eyelids, David's smiling face, the twisted wreckage of the car, the endless white expanse of Antarctica. The voice returned, whispering promises and threats, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. I woke with a start, drenched in a cold sweat. The room was still dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the window. I checked the time on my watch, 04:37. Too early to get up, but sleep was no longer an option. I sat up in bed, my heart still racing. I needed to get a grip, to find some semblance of normalcy in this terrifying situation. I forced myself to take deep breaths, trying to calm my racing thoughts. A knock on the door startled me. I jumped, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. "Dr. Vance," Anya's voice called from the other side. "Are you awake? We need to talk." I reluctantly got out of bed and opened the door. Anya stood in the corridor, her face grim. She was dressed in the same lab coat as the day before, her eyes even more tired. "Come with me," she said, her tone urgent. "Something happened." I followed her down the corridor, my mind racing. Had something gone wrong with the temporal anomaly? Had the voice escaped? Anya led me to the main lab, a large, cavernous room filled with complex machinery and blinking monitors. A group of researchers huddled around a central console, their faces etched with concern. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of dread that made my skin crawl. In the center of the room, a large screen displayed a series of readings. I didn't understand the technical jargon, but I could see that something was clearly wrong. The graphs were erratic, the numbers fluctuating wildly. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Anya pointed to a specific section of the screen. "This is the temporal distortion," she explained, her voice strained. It's expanding, much faster than we anticipated. Expanding, I echoed, my blood turning to ice. What does that mean? It means, Anya said, her voice trembling, that whatever is contained within that distortion is about to be released. A wave of nausea washed over me. The voice, David's voice, was that what was contained within the distortion. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice shaking. Anya looked at me, her eyes filled with desperation. We don't know, she admitted. We've never encountered anything like this before. We're running simulations, trying to find a way to contain it, but she trailed off, shaking her head. But what? I pressed, my voice rising. But we're running out of time, she said, her voice barely audible. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the lab into near darkness. The machinery sputtered and died, the hum that had been a constant presence replaced by an eerie silence. What's happening? Someone shouted, their voice filled with panic. Power failure, Anya said, her voice tight. Emergency generators should kick in any minute. But the emergency generators didn't kick in. The darkness persisted, the silence growing more oppressive. Then a scream pierced the darkness, a blood-curdling shriek that echoed through the lab. What was that? I cried, my heart hammering in my chest. Another scream, followed by a series of panicked shouts. Something in here with us, someone screamed. Something's killing us. Anya grabbed my arm, her grip tight. We need to get out of here, she said, her voice urgent. We stumbled through the darkness, guided only by the faint glow of the emergency lights. The air was thick with fear, the screams growing louder, closer. Suddenly something grabbed my leg, its grip cold and clammy. I screamed, kicking wildly. Alina, Anya shouted, pulling me free. We ran blindly, desperately towards the exit. As we reached the door, I glanced back. In the flickering light, I saw a figure standing in the center of the lab. It was tall and gaunt, its features obscured by the darkness. But I recognized the voice. Don't leave me, Alina, it whispered, its voice filled with a chilling mixture of longing and malice. I just want to be with you. I screamed again and stumbled out of the lab, Anya pulling me along. We ran down the corridor, the voice echoing in my ears, the image of the figure burned into my mind. We reached Anya's office, a small, cramped room filled with files and equipment. Anya slammed the door shut and locked it, her hands shaking. What was that? I gasped, my voice trembling. What did I just see? Anya didn't answer. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with terror. It's here, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's finally here. What is? I demanded, my voice rising. What's here, Anya? Anya took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. The anomaly, she said, her voice shaking. It wasn't just a distortion in time, it was a prison, and we just opened the door. A prison, I echoed, my mind reeling. What was it imprisoning? Anya looked at me, her eyes filled with a horrifying realization. Something, she whispered, that should have stayed buried. Suddenly the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. A cold wind swept through the room, chilling me to the bone. Oh God, Anya whispered, her voice filled with despair. It's here. A scratching sound came from the other side of the door, a slow, deliberate scraping that sent shivers down my spine. Alina, the voice whispered from the darkness, closer than ever before. Let me in. Chapter 3, Echoes of the Dead. The scratching at the door intensified, a frantic, desperate sound that grated on my nerves. Anya and I stood frozen, huddled together in the darkness, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The air grew colder, the temperature plummeting with unnatural speed. I could see my breath misting in the air, a stark reminder of the encroaching horror. What do we do? I whispered, my voice trembling. Anya didn't answer. She was staring at the door, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and resignation. The scratching stopped, replaced by an unnerving silence. Then the door began to shake, rattling in its frame. The metal groaned and buckled under an unseen force. It's trying to get in, I whispered, my voice rising in panic. Anya finally seemed to snap out of her daze. She grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall and handed it to me. "Be ready," she said, her voice tight. "If it gets through, hit it with this. Aim for the head." I took the extinguisher, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold it. The weight of the metal was strangely reassuring, a tangible weapon against an unseen enemy. The shaking intensified, the door groaning louder and louder. Cracks began to spiderweb across the metal surface. "It's going to break through," Anya said, her voice barely audible above the din. Suddenly, with a deafening crash, the door splintered and burst open, showering us with shards of metal. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, its form obscured by the darkness. I raised the fire extinguisher, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, its presence radiating a chilling aura of malice and despair. Then it spoke. "Alina," it whispered, its voice a distorted echo of David's laced with a sinister undertone. "Why are you afraid? It's just me." I hesitated, my resolve faltering. The voice, it sounded so much like him. But the darkness, the chilling presence, it couldn't be David. David was dead. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" The figure took a step forward, emerging from the shadows. Its features were gaunt and skeletal, its eyes glowing with an unnatural, malevolent light. Its skin was stretched taut over its bones, a sickly, translucent white. But it was the voice that truly terrified me. It was David's voice, but twisted, corrupted, filled with a darkness that I had never heard before. "Don't you recognize me, Alina?" it whispered, its voice dripping with a chilling mixture of sadness and rage. "I'm the one you left behind." I gasped, my mind reeling. It couldn't be, but it looked, sounded. "David," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure smiled, a grotesque, horrifying distortion of David's familiar grin. "Yes, Alina," it said, "it's me. I've come back for you." I stumbled back, my grip on the fire extinguisher loosening. It couldn't be David. It just couldn't be. But the voice, the eyes, they were so familiar. "This isn't real," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You're not David." "Oh, but I am, Alina," the figure said, taking another step forward. "I'm everything you ever wanted, everything you ever lost. I'm here to make you whole again." Anya suddenly surged forward, shoving me behind her. She raised a small, handheld taser and fired it at the figure. The taser prong struck the figure's chest, sending a jolt of electricity through its body. The figure screamed, a high-pitched, inhuman shriek that tore through the air. It staggered back, its body convulsing. "Run, Alina," Anya shouted, her voice urgent. "Get out of here, I'll hold it off." I hesitated, torn between staying and helping Anya and fleeing for my life. But the look in Anya's eyes, the desperate plea for survival, it convinced me. I turned and ran blindly, desperately down the corridor. The figure's screams echoed behind me, growing fainter as I fled. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just needed to get away, to escape the horror that had been unleashed. I stumbled into the main lab, the scene of the earlier attack. The room was still dark, the only light coming from the flickering emergency lights. The bodies of the researchers lay scattered across the floor, their faces contorted in expressions of terror. A wave of nausea washed over me. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out to find help. I ran towards the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the door, I heard a sound behind me, a soft, shuffling noise. I whirled around, my eyes scanning the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form gaunt and skeletal. "Hello, Alina," it whispered, its voice a chilling echo of David. "Did you think you could escape me?" I screamed and turned to run, but it was too late. The figure lunged forward, its cold, clammy hands reaching for me. I felt its grip on my arm, its touch sending a jolt of icy terror through my veins. I'm not going to let you go, Alina, it whispered, its voice dripping with malice. You're mine now. I screamed again, my voice lost in the darkness. This was it. This was the end. But then something unexpected happened. A bright light suddenly filled the room, banishing the darkness. The figure recoiled, hissing in pain. I looked up, my eyes widening in disbelief. Standing in the doorway was Anya, holding a flare gun. Get away from her, Anya shouted, her voice filled with fury. She fired the flare gun at the figure, the bright projectile streaking through the air. The flare struck the figure's chest, engulfing it in flames. The figure screamed, a deafening, inhuman shriek that shook the very foundations of the facility. It writhed in agony, its body consumed by the flames. Then, with a final, agonizing shriek, it collapsed to the floor, its body reduced to a smoldering heap. Anya rushed over to me, her face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my body shaking uncontrollably. I think so," I stammered. Anya helped me to my feet. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice urgent. "It's not dead, it'll be back." We stumbled out of the lab, leaving the burning remains of the figure behind. As we ran, I couldn't help but wonder, what had we unleashed, and how could we possibly stop it? Chapter 4: A Gateway to Chaos. We moved through the facility like ghosts, our footsteps echoing eerily in the deserted corridors. The emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes. Every sound, every creak of the metal walls sent a jolt of fear through me. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "To the comms room," Anya replied, her voice tight. "We need to contact McMurdo, tell them what happened." "Do you think they'll believe us?" I asked, skepticism lacing my tone. Anya hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "But we have to try. If we don't, this thing could escape the facility, spread to the mainland." The thought sent a shiver down my spine. The idea of that creature, that twisted mockery of David, running loose in the world, it was unbearable. We reached the comms room, a small, cramped space filled with radio equipment and blinking monitors. Anya rushed to the main console, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Come on," she muttered, her voice strained. "Connect, damn it." The monitors flickered, displaying a series of error messages. Anya cursed under her breath, slamming her fist on the console. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart sinking. "The comms are down," Anya said, her voice filled with despair. "Something's interfering with the signal." "Interfering?" I echoed. "What could be interfering?" Anya looked at me, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization. She whispered. "It's blocking our signal. It doesn't want us to contact anyone." The implication was clear. We were trapped. Utterly, completely trapped. A wave of nausea washed over me. The isolation, the fear, the impossible reality of what was happening, it was all becoming too much. I stumbled back, leaning against the cold metal wall. "I can't do this," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I can't, I just can't." Anya turned to me, her face etched with concern. "Alina," she said, her voice gentle. We have to stop it. If we don't, everyone is going to die." Her words, though harsh, snapped me out of my despair. She was right, I couldn't give up. I had to fight, not just for myself, but for everyone else. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger this time. "Okay, what do we do?" Anya hesitated. "There's one thing," she said, her voice tight. "Something I haven't told you." "What is it?" I asked, my heart sinking. Anya took a deep breath. "The temporal anomaly," she said, her voice shaking. "It wasn't just a prison, it was also a gateway." "A gateway?" I echoed, my mind reeling. "A gateway to what?" "To another dimension," Anya said, her voice barely audible. "A dimension of pure chaos. A place where the laws of physics don't apply, where reality itself is fluid." "You're saying that thing came from another dimension?" I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. "Yes," Anya said, "and if we don't close the gateway, more of them could come through." The thought was terrifying. One of those creatures was bad enough. An army of them, it was unimaginable. "How do we close the gateway?" I asked, my voice trembling. Anya hesitated. "There's a ritual," she said, her voice tight. "An ancient incantation. It's supposed to seal the gateway, banish the creatures back to their dimension." "A ritual?" I echoed, skepticism lacing my tone. "You're telling me that the only way to stop this thing is with some kind of magic spell?" "I know it sounds crazy," Anya said, her voice pleading, "but it's the only thing we have left. We have to try." I looked at her, my mind racing. Magic, rituals, alternate dimensions. It was all so absurd, so unbelievable. But what other choice did we have? "Okay," I said, my voice resigned. "Okay, where do we find this ritual?" Anya led me to a small, locked room adjacent to the comms room. She pulled out a set of keys and unlocked the door, revealing a small, dusty library. The shelves were lined with ancient-looking books and scrolls, their pages filled with strange symbols and arcane writing. "This is the restricted archive," Anya explained, her voice hushed. "It contains all the information we've gathered about the temporal anomaly, including the ritual." We began searching through the books, our fingers tracing the faded pages. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, the silence broken only by the rustling of paper. After what seemed like an eternity, Anya finally found what she was looking for, a small, leather-bound book with a silver clasp. She opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with elegant, ornate writing. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling. "The ritual to seal the gateway." I looked at the book, my mind racing. This was it, our last chance. But as I stared at the strange symbols and arcane writing, a chilling realization dawned on me. The words, they weren't just words. They were something else, something alive. And as I read them, I could feel something stirring within me, something dark and sinister. Suddenly, a voice whispered in my ear, a voice I knew all too well. "Don't do it, Alina," it said, its tone filled with a chilling mixture of pleading and threat. "Don't close the gateway. I want to come home." I gasped, dropping the book. The voice, it was David. But it wasn't just David. It was something else, something far more sinister. And it was inside my head. Chapter 5: Battling the Inner Demon. I stumbled back, clutching my head, trying to block out the voice. It echoed in my mind, a constant, insidious presence that threatened to overwhelm me. "Get out of my head," I screamed, my voice filled with terror. Anya rushed to my side, her face etched with concern. "Alina, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's in my head," I gasped, my voice shaking. "David, it's in my head." Anya's eyes widened in horror. "It's controlling you," she whispered. I don't know," I stammered, "but it's trying to stop me from reading the ritual. It wants to keep the gateway open." Anya grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "We can't let it," she said, her voice urgent. "We have to fight it. We have to close the gateway no matter what." I nodded, trying to focus. But the voice, it was so strong, so persuasive. It was whispering promises, threats, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. "Don't listen to her, Alina," the voice whispered, its tone gentle, soothing. "I'm the only one who can make you happy. I'm the only one who truly understands you." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the voice. But it was no use. It was inside me, a part of me, twisting my thoughts, corrupting my memories. "It's lying, Alina," Anya said, her voice pleading. "It's not David. It's just using his voice to manipulate you." "She's right, Alina," another voice echoed in my mind, a voice that sounded strangely like my own. "Don't let it control you, fight it." I gasped, my mind reeling. There were two voices in my head now, battling for control. David's voice, insidious and manipulative, and my own voice, faint but determined. I opened my eyes, my vision blurring with tears. I don't know what to do, I stammered. Anya looked at me, her eyes filled with compassion. You have to choose, Alina, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You have to decide who you want to be. Do you want to be controlled by that thing, or do you want to be yourself? Do you want to save the world, or do you want to let it be consumed by darkness? Her words resonated within me, giving me strength. She was right. I had to choose. I couldn't let that thing control me. I had to fight to reclaim my own mind, my own life. I took a deep breath, focusing all my will, all my determination on resisting the voice. I choose myself, I said, my voice stronger this time. I choose to fight. The voice screamed in my mind, a high-pitched, agonizing shriek that threatened to shatter my skull. But I held firm, refusing to yield. Slowly, gradually, the voice began to fade, its power diminishing. I could feel it receding, retreating back into the darkness from whence it came. I opened my eyes, my vision clearing. Anya was still there, her face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, taking another deep breath. "I think so," I said, my voice stronger now. "It's weaker, I can fight it." Anya smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. "I knew you could," she said. "Now let's close that gateway." We picked up the book and began reading the ritual, our voices chanting the ancient words. The air grew thick with energy, the room vibrating with power. The symbols on the pages seemed to glow with an inner light, illuminating the darkness. As we chanted, the ground began to shake, the walls trembling. A low, guttural growl echoed through the facility, growing louder and louder. "It's trying to stop us," Anya said, her voice strained. "Keep chanting, don't stop." We continued chanting, our voices rising in unison, the power of the ritual growing stronger. The growling intensified, accompanied by a series of crashes and bangs from outside the room. Suddenly, the door burst open, revealing the figure from before. Its body was still charred and smoldering, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. "You can't stop me, Alina," it hissed, its voice a distorted echo of David. "I'm too strong. The gateway will remain open." It lunged towards us, its hands outstretched, its eyes fixed on me. I screamed, but I didn't stop chanting. I knew that if I stopped, everything would be lost. Anya stepped in front of me, blocking the figure's path. She raised her arms, channeling the power of the ritual. "You will not pass," she said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. "The gateway will be sealed." She unleashed a wave of energy, a blinding light that struck the figure full force. The figure screamed, its body convulsing. The ground shook violently, the walls cracking. The room began to spin, the world blurring around us. Then, with a deafening roar, everything went white. I felt myself floating, drifting through a sea of pure energy. I could see flashes of other dimensions, glimpses of unimaginable horrors and breathtaking beauty. I knew that we were at the precipice of everything changing. We were about to change the boundaries between worlds. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The white light faded, the shaking stopped. The room fell silent, the air still. I opened my eyes, my vision clearing. Anya was still standing in front of me, her face pale but determined. The figure was gone. We looked at each other, our faces etched with relief. We had done it. We had closed the gateway. But as we stared into each other's eyes, I knew that something had changed. The gate was closed, but the effects of what we had done would stay with us. And I knew that while we had closed this gateway, it would only be a matter of time before something, somewhere, opened another one. We stared out into the white abyss, wondering what new form of horror would come our way. Chapter 6: Hunted in the Dark. The silence that followed the closing of the gateway was almost as unsettling as the chaos that preceded it. The hum of the machinery, the howling wind, even the creaking of the metal walls, all seemed to have been muted, as if the entire facility was holding its breath. Anya and I stood in the library, our bodies trembling with exhaustion. We were alive, but we were far from safe. We had closed the gateway, but we didn't know what other horrors might still lurk within the facility. "We need to check the rest of the station," Anya said, her voice tight. "Make sure nothing else came through." I nodded, my heart sinking. The thought of facing another one of those creatures filled me with dread. But I knew she was right. We couldn't afford to be complacent. We cautiously made our way out of the library, our senses on high alert. The corridors were still deserted, the emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every movement. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow seemed to conceal a hidden threat. We reached the main lab, the scene of the earlier attack. The bodies of the researchers were still scattered across the floor, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The air smelled of blood and smoke, a grim reminder of the violence that had transpired. Anya and I exchanged a look of grim determination. We couldn't afford to dwell on the horror. We had to focus on the task at hand, clearing the facility. We began searching the lab, our eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of our own breathing. Suddenly, Anya stopped, her hand raised. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I strained my ears, listening intently. At first I heard nothing, but then a faint sound reached me, a soft, rhythmic tapping. "What is it?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Anya hesitated. "I don't know," she said, her voice tight, "but it's coming from the ventilation system." The ventilation system was a network of narrow ducts that ran throughout the facility, providing air circulation. The thought of something lurking inside those ducts, something unseen, unknown, it sent a shiver down my spine. "We need to check it out," Anya said, her voice firm. "If something's in there, we need to know." We followed the sound of the tapping, our footsteps echoing eerily in the deserted lab. The tapping grew louder as we approached a large ventilation grate in the corner of the room. Anya pulled a small flashlight from her pocket and shone it into the grate. The beam of light illuminated the dark, narrow duct. At first I saw nothing, but then a pair of eyes reflected the light back at me, glowing with an unnatural, malevolent intensity. I gasped, stumbling back. "There's something in there," I cried, my voice filled with terror. Anya didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy metal pipe from the floor and thrust it into the grate, striking whatever was inside. A screeching sound echoed through the lab, a high-pitched, inhuman shriek that made my blood run cold. The tapping stopped, replaced by a series of frantic scrabbling noises. Anya pulled the pipe back, her face grim. "Whatever it is, it's not happy," she said, her voice tight. Suddenly, the ventilation grate burst open, showering us with dust and debris. A creature emerged from the duct, its form grotesque and terrifying. It was small and hunched, with pale, translucent skin stretched taut over its bones. Its eyes were large and black, devoid of pupils, reflecting the light with an unnatural intensity. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in sharp, claw-like fingers. It looked like a twisted, emaciated child, a grotesque mockery of humanity. The creature hissed, its mouth opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. It lunged towards us, its claws outstretched. Anya and I screamed, stumbling back. We were unarmed, unprepared for another attack. But then something unexpected happened. The creature stopped, its body convulsing. It hissed and writhed in agony, its eyes rolling back in its head. Then, with a final, agonizing shriek, it collapsed to the floor, its body lifeless. Anya and I stared at the creature's corpse, our minds reeling. What had happened? Why had it just died? Suddenly, a voice echoed through the lab, a voice that was both familiar and terrifying. "You can't stop me," it whispered, its tone filled with a chilling mixture of sadness and rage. "I'm everywhere. I'm everything." I gasped, my blood turning to ice. The voice, it was David. But it wasn't just David. It was something else, something far more sinister. And it was inside the ventilation system. Anya and I exchanged a look of horror. The creature we had just killed, it had been controlled by David, and there were probably more of them, lurking in the vents, waiting to strike. "We have to get out of here," Anya said, her voice trembling. "It's too dangerous. We can't fight them all." I nodded, my mind racing. Where could we go? Where could we possibly be safe? Then an idea struck me. There was one place in the facility that we hadn't checked yet, a place that might offer us some protection. "The ice core storage," I said, my voice urgent. "It's deep underground, heavily insulated. It might be safe from whatever that is." Anya hesitated. "The ice core storage," she echoed. "Are you sure it's freezing down there?" "It's our only chance," I said, my voice pleading. "Please, Anya, we have to try." Anya looked at me, her eyes filled with doubt. But she could see the desperation in my face, the fear that was driving me. "Okay," she said, her voice resigned. "Okay, let's go." We turned and ran, our footsteps echoing eerily in the deserted lab. The voice followed us, whispering taunts and threats, its presence growing stronger with every step. As we fled, I couldn't help but wonder, what awaited us in the ice core storage? And would it be any better than the horrors we were leaving behind? Chapter 7: Sanctuary of the Frozen Past. The descent to the ice core storage was a journey into the heart of the Antarctic chill. The elevator creaked and groaned as it plunged deeper beneath the facility, the temperature dropping with every meter. The air grew thick with frost, coating the metal walls with a layer of ice. Anya and I huddled together, shivering in the cold. We were dressed in our standard lab attire, woefully inadequate for the frigid conditions. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, numbing my extremities. "Are you sure about this, Alina?" Anya asked, her teeth chattering. "It's going to be freezing down there." "It's our only chance," I replied, my voice trembling. "We need to find somewhere safe, somewhere it can't reach us." The elevator lurched to a halt, the doors sliding open to reveal a long, narrow corridor. The walls were lined with thick insulation panels, the floor covered with a layer of ice. The air was so cold it stung my lungs with every breath. "This is it," I said, my voice hushed. "The ice core storage." We stepped out of the elevator, our footsteps crunching on the ice. The corridor stretched before us, disappearing into the darkness. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of our own breathing. We walked cautiously down the corridor, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The temperature continued to drop, the cold becoming almost unbearable. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The darkness seemed to press in on us, the silence filled with an unseen presence. We reached the main storage chamber, a vast, cavernous space filled with rows upon rows of ice cores. The cores were encased in clear plastic tubes, their frozen contents a record of the Earth's history, stretching back millennia. The sight of those ancient ice cores, those frozen fragments of the past, filled me with a strange sense of awe and unease. It was as if we were standing in a cathedral of time, surrounded by the ghosts of forgotten ages. "This is it," I said, my voice hushed. "We're safe here for now." We found a small alcove in the corner of the chamber and huddled together, trying to conserve our body heat. The cold was relentless, seeping into our bones, numbing our minds. As we waited, I couldn't help but think about David, about the voice, the creature, the twisted mockery of the man I had loved. Was it really him? Was there some part of David still trapped inside that thing? Or was it just an imitation, a cruel manipulation designed to break me? I didn't know, and I didn't know if I ever wanted to know. Suddenly, a sound reached us, a faint scratching noise. It was coming from the walls. Anya and I exchanged a look of horror. It had followed us. It was still hunting us. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. It seemed to be coming from everywhere, surrounding us, trapping us. Then the lights flickered, plunging the chamber into near darkness. The emergency lights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the ice cores. The scratching stopped, replaced by an unnerving silence. Then a voice whispered in my ear, a voice I knew all too well. "Hello, Alina," it said, its tone filled with a chilling mixture of sadness and rage. "Did you think you could escape me?" I screamed, stumbling back. It was here. It was in the chamber with us. Anya grabbed a nearby ice core and swung it at the darkness, striking something with a sickening thud. A screeching sound echoed through the chamber, a high-pitched, inhuman shriek that made my blood run cold. The lights flickered again, revealing the figure from before. Its body was still charred and smoldering, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. It was standing in the center of the chamber, surrounded by a swirling mist of ice crystals. It looked like a demon from hell, a creature of pure nightmare. "You can't stop me, Alina," it hissed, its voice a distorted echo of David. "I'm too strong. This world will be mine." It raised its arms, channeling the power of the ice. The temperature plummeted, the air growing so cold it felt like liquid nitrogen. The ice cores began to crack, their frozen contents shattering into fragments. The chamber shook violently, the walls groaning under the strain. Anya and I screamed, huddling together for protection. We were trapped, surrounded by ice and darkness, facing a creature of unimaginable power. This was it. This was the end. But then something unexpected happened. A voice echoed through the chamber, a voice that was both familiar and new. "You are wrong," the voice said, its tone filled with authority. "This world will not be yours." The figure turned, its eyes widening in surprise. Standing in the doorway was a man I had never seen before. He was tall and gaunt, with a long, flowing beard and piercing blue eyes. He wore a simple brown robe, his feet bare despite the freezing temperature. He looked like a prophet from the Bible, a messenger from God. "Who are you?" the figure hissed, its voice filled with rage. The man smiled, a gentle, compassionate smile. "I am a guardian," he said, his voice resonating with power, "and I am here to stop you." He raised his arms, channeling a power that was far greater than anything I had ever witnessed. A blinding light filled the chamber, banishing the darkness. The figure screamed, its body convulsing. It writhed in agony, its form dissolving into a swirling mist of ice crystals. Then with a final, agonizing shriek, it was gone. The light faded, the shaking stopped. The chamber fell silent, the air still. The man turned to us, his eyes filled with compassion. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice gentle. "You are safe now." Anya and I stared at him, our minds reeling. Who was this man? Where did he come from? And how did he possess such power? "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man smiled. "That is not important," he said. "What is important is that you are alive, and that you have a choice to make." "A choice?" I echoed. "What choice?" The man looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound wisdom. "The gateway has been closed," he said, "but the darkness remains. It will always be a part of this world, and it will always seek to return." He paused, his gaze piercing my soul. "You have the power to fight it, Alina," he said. "You have the strength to protect this world, but you must choose to embrace that power. You must choose to become a guardian yourself." I stared at him, my mind racing. A guardian, me? I was just a geologist, a woman running from her past. How could I possibly become something so extraordinary? But as I looked into his eyes, I knew that he was right. I had a choice to make. I could continue running, hiding from the darkness, or I could stand and fight. I could embrace my destiny, become a guardian, and protect this world from the horrors that lurked beyond. I took a deep breath, my heart filled with a newfound determination. "I choose to fight," I said, my voice stronger than ever before. The man smiled, his eyes shining with approval. "Then let us begin," he said, "for the battle has only just begun." Chapter 8. Training for the Inevitable. The man, who only introduced himself as Kane, explained that the facility was built on a convergence point, a nexus of temporal and dimensional energies, making it a place uniquely vulnerable to breaches from other realities. He claimed to be part of an ancient order, guardians tasked with protecting the world from these incursions. The story he spun was fantastical, bordering on insane, yet the raw power emanating from him, the undeniable truth in his eyes, forced me to accept it. Anya, ever the scientist, struggled more, demanding explanations and evidence. Yet even she couldn't deny what we had both witnessed. Kane began to train us, pushing us both physically and mentally. The training was brutal. We learned to control our fear, to channel our inner strength, to recognize and manipulate the energies that flowed through the facility. He showed us the true nature of the creatures we had faced, explaining that they were manifestations of negative emotions, given form and power by the dimensional energies. The facility itself became our training ground. Kane led us through its hidden passages and forgotten chambers, revealing its secrets and its history. We learned that Chronos Station wasn't just a research facility. It was a prison, built to contain the very entities we were now battling. As we trained, I began to understand the nature of my own connection to the darkness. The voice, the creature that had mimicked David, wasn't just a random entity. It had latched onto my grief, my guilt, my unresolved pain, using my own emotions as a weapon against me. Kane helped me confront my past, forcing me to relive the trauma I had tried so hard to bury. It was agonizing, but it was also liberating. As I faced my demons, I began to strip them of their power, weakening the entity that had been feeding on my pain. Anya, meanwhile, focused on the scientific aspects of the situation. She studied the facility's systems, searching for ways to enhance its defenses, to detect and contain future breaches. She even began to develop new weapons, using the facility's technology to harness the energies of the convergence point. As we grew stronger, the attacks intensified. The creatures became more frequent, more powerful, more cunning. They seemed to be testing us, probing our defenses, searching for a weakness. One night, as we were patrolling the corridors, we encountered a new type of creature, one we had never seen before. It was tall and slender, with long, sharp claws and glowing red eyes. It moved with unnatural speed, its movements jerky and unpredictable. It attacked without warning, slashing at us with its claws. Anya and I fought back, using the skills Kane had taught us. But the creature was too fast, too strong. It dodged our attacks, its claws tearing through our clothing, drawing blood. We were losing. Suddenly, Kane appeared, his eyes blazing with power. He raised his hands, channeling the energy of the convergence point. A wave of pure force erupted from him, striking the creature full force. The creature screamed, its body dissolving into a cloud of black smoke. It was gone. Kane turned to us, his face pale with exhaustion. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice strained. Anya and I nodded, our bodies shaking with adrenaline. "It's getting stronger," Kane said, his voice grim. "The barrier between dimensions is weakening. Soon, they will be able to cross over in greater numbers." "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Kane hesitated. "There is one thing we can try," he said, his voice tight. "A ritual, an ancient incantation that can reinforce the barrier, seal the convergence point." "But you said the last ritual almost destroyed us," Anya said, her voice filled with concern. "This one is different," Kane replied. "This one is more powerful, more dangerous. It requires a sacrifice." "A sacrifice," I echoed, my blood turning to ice. "Yes," Kane said, his gaze piercing my soul. "A sacrifice of the self. One of us must enter the convergence point, willingly becoming a part of it, anchoring the barrier with their own life force." Anya and I stared at him, our minds reeling. He was asking us to sacrifice ourselves, to give up our lives to save the world. Who has to do it? Anya asked, the dread evident in her voice. Kane looked from me to Anya. The ritual will choose, he said, but know this, the one who steps forth will never return. As we prepared for the ritual, Anya and I spoke in hushed tones about what it all meant, about what would happen, and what the other should do if only one of us came back. The ritual was not to take place until the next night, so we went about our duties, patrolling, training, and bracing ourselves for what would come. Would it be me? I couldn't help but think of what it meant if it was. Would I ever see the sun again? Would I ever escape the pain that haunted me? Was this my fate, to be forever in darkness? Chapter 9. The Price of Salvation. The night of the ritual arrived with a chilling inevitability. The wind howled outside, a mournful dirge that seemed to echo the dread in our hearts. The emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting long, distorted shadows across the facility. Anya and I stood with Kane in the main lab, the convergence point throbbing with an unseen energy. The air crackled with power, raising the hairs on my arms. The facility felt like a living thing, holding its breath in anticipation. The ritual chamber was located deep beneath the facility, in a section that had been sealed off for centuries. It was a circular room, constructed of a strange, obsidian-like stone. The walls were covered with intricate carvings, depicting scenes of cosmic horror and ancient sacrifice. In the center of the chamber, a swirling vortex of energy pulsed, the convergence point in its rawest form. It was a terrifying sight, a glimpse into the infinite darkness that lay beyond our reality. Kane began to chant, his voice resonating with power. The ancient words echoed through the chamber, stirring the energies of the convergence point. The carvings on the walls seemed to come alive, their grotesque figures writhing and twisting in the shadows. Anya and I joined in the chant, our voices trembling with fear and determination. The energy in the chamber intensified, the air growing thick and heavy. I could feel the power coursing through my veins, filling me with a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. As we chanted, the convergence point began to glow, its light growing brighter and brighter. The vortex swirled faster and faster, its energy reaching a fever pitch. Suddenly, a beam of light shot out from the convergence point, striking Anya and me. The light was searing hot, burning through my skin, searing my soul. I screamed, my body convulsing. I felt myself being pulled towards the convergence point, drawn into its vortex of energy. Anya screamed beside me, struggling against the pull, but the force was too strong. We were both being dragged towards the abyss. Then, just as we were about to be consumed, the light shifted. The beam that had been pulling me towards the convergence point suddenly weakened, while the beam that was pulling Anya intensified. I watched in horror as Anya was lifted into the air, her body glowing with an ethereal light. She screamed, her face contorted in an expression of pure terror. "Anya," I cried, reaching out to her. "No." But it was too late. Anya was being pulled into the convergence point, her body dissolving into a cloud of light. With a final, agonizing scream, she was gone. The vortex slowed, the light began to dim, and the facility grew quiet. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Anya was gone. She had sacrificed herself to save the world. Kane approached me, his face etched with grief. "She has done what was necessary," he said, his voice gentle. "Her sacrifice will not be in vain." I looked up at him, my eyes filled with rage. "Necessary?" I screamed. "She didn't have to die. There had to be another way." Kane shook his head. "There was no other way," he said. "The convergence point needed to be anchored. Only a willing sacrifice could provide the necessary power." I stared at him, my mind reeling. He was right. There was no other way. Anya had known the risks, and she had chosen to face them. She had sacrificed herself for the greater good. And now, it was up to me to honor her sacrifice, to continue the fight against the darkness, to protect this world from the horrors that lurked beyond. I took a deep breath, wiping away my tears. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice stronger this time. Kane looked at me, his eyes filled with a newfound hope. "Now," he said, "we prepare for the final battle." He said that the entities would be enraged, that they would sense the shift in power and lash out with a force we have not yet seen, and that they would come for me. That I now carried the weight of Anya's sacrifice and the burden of guarding this convergence point. And that because I had seen it all and felt it all, I was also vulnerable to manipulation by these creatures. He said I would need to use my pain as power, my grief as a weapon. I looked out into the empty ice and resolved myself to my fate. Chapter 10: Guardian of the Convergence. The final battle began not with a roar but with a whisper. A whisper in my mind, a familiar voice promising solace and reunion. David. Or rather, the entity that wore his face, his voice, his memories. It was more cunning now, more subtle. It knew it couldn't overpower me, so it sought to deceive me, to lure me into a false sense of security. "It's over, Alina," the voice whispered. "The gateway is sealed. There's nothing left to fight. Come with me. Let me take you to a place where there is no pain, no fear, no loss. A place where we can be together forever." I resisted, focusing on Anya's sacrifice, on Kane's training, on the responsibility I now carried. But the voice was persistent, relentless. It knew my weaknesses, my vulnerabilities. It preyed on my loneliness, my longing for a connection that was forever lost. The attacks intensified, both physical and psychological. The creatures came in waves, each more grotesque and terrifying than the last. They sought to wear me down, to break my spirit, to make me vulnerable to the entity's influence. Kane fought alongside me, his power undiminished despite his age. He was a shield against the darkness, a beacon of hope in the face of despair. But even he could not be everywhere at once. One night, as we were defending the facility from a particularly vicious assault, Kane was wounded. A creature managed to slip past our defenses, its claws tearing through his robe, drawing blood. I screamed, rushing to his side. But it was too late. Kane's eyes glazed over, his body collapsing to the floor. "Kane," I cried, my voice filled with anguish. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and resignation. "It is my time," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You must carry on, Alina." With a final, rattling breath, he was gone. I was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone. The last bastion of hope had fallen. The entity's voice echoed in my mind, louder now, more insistent. "It's all over, Alina," it whispered. "There's no one left to help you. Surrender to me. Let me end your suffering." I closed my eyes, succumbing to despair. It was right. There was no hope. I couldn't fight it anymore. But then a memory surfaced. A memory of Anya, smiling at me, her eyes filled with determination. A memory of Kane, his voice resonating with power, telling me that I had the strength to protect this world. Their sacrifices, their faith in me, it couldn't be for nothing. I couldn't give up. I had to fight, even if it meant facing the impossible. I opened my eyes, my heart filled with a newfound resolve. "I will not surrender," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I will fight you to the end." The entity's voice roared in my mind, a furious, desperate sound. "Then you will die," it screamed. The creatures surged forward, their claws outstretched, their eyes burning with hatred. I stood my ground, channeling the power of the convergence point, the energy of Anya's sacrifice, the wisdom of Kane's training. I was no longer just Alina Vance, a geologist running from her past. I was a guardian, a protector, a warrior against the darkness. I unleashed a wave of energy, a blinding light that struck the creatures full force. They screamed, their bodies dissolving into dust. The entity's voice echoed in my mind, weaker now, fading. "You cannot defeat me," it whispered. "I am a part of you. I will always be a part of you." I closed my eyes, focusing all my will, all my determination, on banishing the entity from my mind. I delved into the depths of my soul, confronting my grief, my guilt, my pain. I forgave myself for David's death. I accepted the loss, the pain, the emptiness, and as I did, the entity's power began to wane. I opened my eyes, my vision clearing. The creatures were gone, the facility was silent. The entity's voice was silent too. I had won, but I knew that the victory was only temporary. The darkness would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to return. But I would be ready. I would stand guard, protecting this world from the horrors that lay beyond. I walked to the window and stared out at the desolate landscape. The wind still howled, but it no longer sounded mournful. It sounded like a challenge, a call to arms. I smiled, my heart filled with a newfound sense of purpose. The battle may be endless, but I was no longer afraid. I was a guardian, and I would never surrender. Epilogue. Years passed. Alina remained at Chronos Station, now not just a researcher but the warden of the dimensional gate. She trained new recruits, taught them the ways of the Guardians, and prepared them for the endless battle against the darkness. The station changed, too. It became more than just a research outpost or a prison. It became a sanctuary, a beacon of hope in a world teetering on the brink of cosmic horror. One day, a new recruit, fresh from the surface, asked Alina about the cold. "Does it ever stop?" she asked, shivering in her new gear. Alina smiled, a knowing, haunted smile. "No," she said, "but you get used to it, and besides, it keeps the monsters out." The recruit looked at Alina, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. She knew that she had a lot to learn, but she also knew that she was in the right place. She was a guardian now, and she would never surrender. The end.